welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay. Welcome everyone. If anyone is ever curious, the reason I do the minute pause at the beginning of these webinars is to let everyone move from the waiting room into the webinar. Um, but I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. It's going to be on exploring effective enforcement policies and technology in priority marine areas. And we're thrilled to have Bob Farrell with WildAid on to talk to us today. My name is Sarah Carr, and I'm the Chief Knowledge Broker for OCTO, Open Communications for the Ocean. For those of you who aren't familiar with OCTO, we're an NGO that connects ocean professionals to the knowledge and networks they need through our webinar series and our 3 online communities on marine protected areas, marine ecosystem-based management, and ocean plastic. We also provide custom consulting services. This webinar is going to last for an hour, and we'll have the formal presentation from Bob, followed by an open question and answer. You can send in questions for Bob either through the Q&A or the chat. The Q&A is a little easier for me to moderate, but the chat has the benefit that if you were interested in input from others in the webinar, you can make your question visible to others, and they may be able to give you input as well. So for the chat, again, you can put things into the chat. You can share with everyone. We just ask that you keep it professional and on topic. And a recording of today's webinar will be available at on the OCTO webinar on our webinars page later today. I'll also post that link in the chat. I'll turn it over to Bob now. Bob, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, no problem, Sarah. Hopefully my screen is sharing appropriately. Can you just confirm that?
It is, yes, I can
All right,
confirm that.
awesome. Great. All right. Well, hopefully everyone can see my screen, and good day to wherever you are. It's morning for me, so I'm somewhat fresh, but I might have to apologize a little bit. I'm getting over a cold, so if I have a cough or a sneeze here and there, please forgive me. So we'll start right into it. As Sarah said, my name is Bob Farrell. I'm a retired chief of a conservation law enforcement program in the U.S. And I'd like to talk a little bit about WildAid Marine and their program and some of what we do. And then also, as the title of the webinar said, we'll talk a little bit about some of the technologies that we've been evaluating for enforcement use. So let's get right into it. So, WildAid Marine has a global marine enforcement program, and we design and apply effective enforcement and compliance systems and strategies for priority marine areas around the globe. So the approach is somewhat unique as it applies some metrics and a system to these marine areas to appropriately design an enforcement program. So one of the things that makes WildAid Marine unique is the personnel. So we have a lot of enforcement expertise from a variety of sources. So we have retired Coast Guard officers who work directly with marine enforcement and fisheries programs. We have U.S. States command staff. We have folks from retired from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources, the Florida Fish and Wildlife. So we have quite a bit of expertise when it comes to fisheries and conservation law enforcement. So WildAid has several projects throughout the world. The larger program WildAid manages has several focus areas, including wildlife and marine and climate change. And again, I work in the marine program, and you can see that we have quite a bit of sites across the globe. Some of the more iconic sites like Galapagos, Cocos Island, projects in the Bahamas, projects in Palau, offer us a good snapshot into some of the work that we do in a variety of locations. It's quite diverse. So here's the cornerstone of what we do. We call it the blueprint for marine protection. So it involves, and some of you may be familiar with what's called an enforcement chain. So it's somewhat similar in that we focus on 5 key areas, which we'll talk about a little bit coming up. But these are kind of a nice little graphic that shows the way these are interconnected to form our marine protection system. And within that system, we have several steps that we move through when we start to evaluate a site or work with a site in the marine arena. And we'll talk a little bit about each of those. So first one is kind of discovery. And so again, we're identifying prospective sites. It's really important for us to apply some metrics to finding sites that are what we feel have a high chance of success to implement the program. And we have a set number of criteria that we look at, including, folks on the ground, the current state of the marine protected area, and where we might be able to focus our efforts. So we have a few criteria that we apply when we're scoping a site. Second is the partnership. Obviously, we want to have good folks in country that can give us the landscape. Oftentimes someone may come to a site and not have the contextual knowledge available to apply a good system there. And so we look for areas and partnerships that can give us that contextual information, those on the ground, in country folks that can give us the real picture of what's happening in a particular site. And then third, and this is really where our expertise comes in and is kind of the meat of the system, if you will, is the enforcement design. So when we go in, we conduct a full assessment of the current enforcement system. And again, we're focusing on enforcement. A lot of sites have a marine plan or a management plan. Sometimes that enforcement component of the management plan hasn't been fully fleshed out. So that's really where we're focusing and making sure that the design of an enforcement system as a component of the management plan is adequate. And so we have a complete matrix, and the next slide will talk a little bit about one component of that as an example. But this matrix is basically evaluating all those criteria in that 5-step plan that we looked at, or the 5-component plan that we looked at. So each of those components we go through and apply our customized matrix to see the criteria and understand where there are any gaps in the enforcement system, or the places that we can focus. So the matrix itself is been designed by our in-house subject matter experts and also applied by our subject matter experts. So it takes contextual knowledge in the enforcement arena to be able to apply this matrix to a particular site. So I'll give you an example here in the next slide. So this is just an example of something like, say, vessel availability, right? So we look at basically indicators, activities, outputs, and outcomes, and apply our unique expertise in evaluating the efficiency and the availability of vessels. So again, very simply, if we go into a country and the vessels are in poor shape, or vessel availability is low for patrol, that's assigned a numerical score. It's something that we evaluate across the board and look at to see if that might be a priority focus area or an area where we need to put our resources in. So these this type of matrix and this type of kind of criteria would be applied across the board for all five of those categories. So, for instance, policies and consequences, we would look at the regulatory landscape in the country or in the MPA and look and see how efficient or effective that is. And so we apply very similar criteria to everything within that matrix. And then we craft a customized plan, and you can see some examples of what we've done before. We did one for Palau. This one was actually for the Northern Reef. We did one for coastal Ecuador, and we did one for the Galapagos. So again, within these customized plans, you would see the results of our assessment, and you would see a table outlining various recommendations. Excuse me. So the fourth step would be putting the NPS plan into action. So we went in and we've done the assessment. We've looked at priority areas where we feel, the enforcement plan can be improved upon. And we've put that plan in writing. We've given some recommendations. And then we really work with our local partners, the funders, and try to craft an implementation plan based on those recommendations. And so if there are maybe say 12 recommendations, we'll try to focus on those ones that we know we can make happen, or those ones that are prioritized based on our conversations with our partners on site. And then finally, the implementation is going well. We try to provide continuing mentorship, whether that's an in-country visit to go on patrol, to see how things are working, to identify additional gaps, to identify those champions or those folks that need help in moving the plan forward, or any other areas of improvement, even case support. So we'll walk some of our partners through a case package, an actual investigation, or provide support in that way, working with prosecutors, working with officers to try and craft a good case package moving forward and provide that mentorship and that support ongoing. And then finally, as part of that mentorship, we try to develop local expertise. So for instance, in Galapagos, we'll host regional peer workshops so that Galapagos Rangers maybe can share their experience with their surrounding countries. We've done this in the Bahamian context. We've offered the Bahamians to come over to Florida and share experience with Florida Fish and Wildlife. And most recently, we just conducted an exchange between the Palau officers and the officers in Hawaii. So this is really important to develop those regional resources so that people aren't flying across the world and seeing something completely different, where they can go maybe to a neighboring country and learn from those officers in a peer-to-peer exchange process. So that's kind of a snapshot of what we do in terms of the Marine Protection Plan, what WildAid does, what I and my colleagues do in various countries throughout the world. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the technological solutions that we run across. So obviously, technology is a big part of the future of fisheries enforcement, and we want to make sure that the tools that we have and the tools that we use are effective. So that's another part of my job, is to try and evaluate some of these technological solutions. And some of them work, some of them are available across the world, and some of them are free, some of them work for some things, some of them don't work for others. So I wanted to highlight a couple of things, a couple of services that we've been working on, and kind of give you a snapshot of what we do. So two providers that we work with are Global Fishing Watch and Skylight. So these are both open data source solutions that offer satellite tracking of vessels, whether through AIS, which is a global meant for collision avoidance, but is both tracked by Global Fishing Watch and Skylight through satellite signals from fishing vessels and other vessels, and also VMS, which is proprietary, generally only for fishing vessels, and it's tracked individually by country usually. But Global Fishing Watch has made great inroads to make that data publicly available. So these are two providers that we have been working with in providing their services to countries for a little bit of maritime domain awareness and kind of vessel tracking off their coast. And while it's not always applicable to some of the artisanal fleets or smaller vessels, it's a great way to kind of show you a snapshot of vessel activity and fishing activity across many different areas of the planet. So that's really nice. And we've evaluated both of these services, and it's always something that we integrate into our presentations and advise countries that they have access to this stuff and try to give training and make sure that they have a good idea of what they do. And the next slide will show you a little snapshot of some of the stuff. And then the second part, along with these open data sources, is data collection. And this is really vitally important. The law enforcement community has been aware of the need for data collection since law enforcement existed. But conservation law enforcement has kind of been behind the times a little bit in data collection, even in some North American jurisdictions. But across the world, it's been a real challenge to track and understand the types of data needed for effective enforcement. So two of the products out there, Earth Ranger and Smart, have made inroads into that data collection piece. So we've been actively working with them to understand data collection needs and develop data collection models for enforcement that would enhance the tracking of data that enforcement officers are collecting for intel analysis, and also to have some measure of activity. So it's really important from a funding perspective to get credit for the work that you do. So working with both Earth Ranger and Smart to provide data collection services have been a real bonus for us, and we continue to do that throughout many of our project sites. So here's just a little snapshot of what Skylight offers. And basically, it's just a map, real-time map of some of the vessel activity off of a coastline. And again, these are usually larger vessels, so sometimes they don't always show the smaller vessel activity, but it's a great resource. Excuse me, it's a great resource to have and to show countries' maritime domain awareness capability from an open source standpoint. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about hardware and technological solutions. So we've been asked throughout the last few years to evaluate various technologies from our hardware perspective. So drones, cameras, radars, and there's a lot of very interesting technology out there. One of the ongoing projects that we have had is testing autonomous vehicles in the marine environment. And these are used to monitor marine protected areas, open oceans, and look for vessel activity or other types of activity on the water. One of the vendors that we continue to work with, in fact, I'll be going to Victoria, British Columbia later today, is a little autonomous vehicle from Open Ocean Robotics. And we tested this in the Bahamas, and we continue to work with them to provide maritime domain awareness kind of in smaller areas, right? So this particular piece of technology is solar powered, and it has a variety of sensors that are available to put on the vessel, and we're actively working with them to develop a sensor suite that would help us determine activity on the water. So for enforcement, the activity is really something we're interested in, but it's not just the presence of a vessel. We'd really like to know a couple things with certainty, right? So one of those things is the vessel's position. It's really important for us to have an accurate position, as it's critical for our enforcement of marine protected areas, boundaries. So the positional accuracy is very important for us. And in addition to that, we want to have certainty of activity. So some of the other services we talked about in terms of vessel activity, we're applying algorithms and assumptions to that vessel's activity. So if a vessel moves in a particular way, we can make some assumptions about what that vessel's doing, but we don't know for certainty if that vessel's fishing. So something that's on the water that can provide perhaps visual confirmation of that vessel's activity. We see nets deployed, we see fishing gear deployed. Those are the things that will help us from an enforcement context, especially when we try to make that case in court, right? We have to confirm that vessel's activity and that vessel's position. So things like on the water cameras that some of these technological solutions provide are very helpful in that. So that's kind of what we're working with to determine, what kind of sensors would give us a better confirmation of that vessel's activity as well as their position. And so one of the things that this particular piece does is provide perhaps visual confirmation along with some additional information that can help us confirm that vessel's activity. So those are kind of some exciting things that we've been working on from the technological hardware solution. And I think that's going to wrap up my presentation and leave plenty of room for questions. And then finally, I'll just leave a little slide up there to give some information about contacting WildAid. And feel free to reach out if you have additional questions that you think of after the presentation, or you want more information on what WildAid does in particular. This is the contact info to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bob. We so appreciate you coming and sharing all the work that you are doing and WildAid is doing, and a lot of your collaborators. Um, so this is a great overview, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions. You can send in questions through the Q&A panel, and that's sort of preferred if it's just a straight question, or you can also paste it in the chat, and I can moderate it from there too, and that would benefit of that is if you wanted input from others on the call as well, because other people could respond to that. So we'll go ahead and get started with some of the questions that came in during the presentation. One was, how often does the data from Global Fishing Watch update? If a vessel fished inside an MPA, would the data be available in near real time, or is there a lag?
Yeah, so we're going to answer these questions as they come in, Sarah.
Yes, yes, we'll go.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah, great question. So unfortunately, Global Fishing Watch on much of the data for VMS has about a 72-hour delay. And that was made, they negotiated these agreements with the country to provide that information. But as a caveat to that, that information would be 72 hours delayed. So for VMS, we have a 72-hour lag time. For AIS, there are other services in addition to Global Fishing Watch that would give you real-time information on AIS activity. But there is a 72-hour delay on most of the VMS data. However, there are some agreements for enforcement that would provide that data immediately, maybe not through Global Fishing Watch, but through the provider that has contracted with the country. So to the public, 72-hour delay. For enforcement purposes, you may be able to get that real time.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Okay, another question that came in. One of my primary concerns and research interests is combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated IUU fishing. I'm particularly interested in using a combination of radar data, optical imagery, and deep learning techniques to track offenders and support relevant authorities in reducing the occurrence of IUU fishing. Have you ever worked on something similar? I would like to learn about the best practices and resources available in this area.
Yeah,
So,
that's a great question. I think radar is a great tool, and there's a system called M2 that we have also worked with, and I'm sorry I didn't include that in the technological hardwares, but this is essentially either a static or mobile radar that's in use for a particular area. The challenge, again, is providing a response, right? So while detection technologies are coming along great, right? So we have satellites, optical imagery, radar. All these are great at detecting vessel presence, but we also want to make sure that we have kind of a tip and cue system and understand that just that information alone may not tell us everything we need to know about the vessel's activity. And then once we know we've detected a vessel, we've determined that it's likely fishing. Now we need to create the infrastructure for a response, right? So that response can either be a direct interdiction by, a vessel in the area, an enforcement vessel, or providing enough information for an investigative response. And those two things are sometimes difficult, and countries don't often have the resources to provide that either interdiction or the expertise to provide an investigative response. So that's really the challenge, is making sure that that enforcement chain is complete. So not just about the detection, but also your response.
okay, thank you, Bob. And I just posted a webinar that we held in October, a link to that on M2 in the chat, if anybody
Oh,
wants to
perfect.
check
All
that out.
right. Yeah.
Great. And let's see, another question. Do you have any suggestions on how to encourage law enforcement to use technology like radars, specifically in California?
Yeah, well, currently in California, we have several of those radars set up. So in Santa Barbara, I think there's one at Campus Point, and there's also a few in the Channel Islands. And there have been cases that have been made. You can Google it. I don't have the case off the top of my head, but there was, I believe, in Swami's Marine Protected Area, there was a case that was made with the use of the M2 radar. But as you can kind of hear from my earlier conversation, just the radar presence or just the detection is sometimes not enough for the case to be made. So there needs to be an investigative response, and those resources need to be, utilized as well. But certainly it is being used in California, and there's several areas throughout the world that these radars have been successful, and they also provide some deterrence. But making a case solely based on vessel presence can sometimes be a little difficult.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bob. Let's see, another question from the chat. Are any of the technological solutions you mentioned part of the capacity building or assistance with the country's sites you work with? Also, what's the usual timeline of the assistance provided in areas you work? Is it more one-off or spanning a few years to do some monitoring and evaluation of your intervention?
Yeah, so another great question. So we always evaluate various technologies. One of the ones that we suggest is that data collection that I talked about. We're trying to implement data collection in almost every jurisdiction that we work in, but we look for technological solutions and look for the best fit. So, for instance, if there's a nearshore MPA, a radar might be an effective tool. If there are geographic or topographical limitations to the radar's, signature, if there's a mountain in the way that would prohibit, a good radar implementation, these are the types of things we look at in technology. And at the end of the day, a lot of the technologies are cost prohibitive for some of our jurisdictions. So when I say technology, it might be somebody with a thermal camera or a thermal scope at night on a beach might be the most effective use of technology in one of our jurisdictions. A pair of binoculars might be more effective than installing, a $250,000 radar. So these are all the things that we look at and try to get the biggest bang for buck for the buck on technologies and implementing them in these areas. But certainly we look for long-term solutions. Most of the time when we go into an area, we are looking for a long-term commitment. We want to make sure that we're building, again, as I explained in the presentation, a good mentorship program and building local expertise to try and mitigate some of our long-term engagement. But at the end of the day, we want these folks to be able to kind of be self-sufficient in terms of funding, in terms of expertise. But oftentimes the areas that we go into, that's not immediately accessible. So we try not to do a one-off project, but try to make sure that we're there to maintain a consistent enforcement program for many years to come. And in Galapagos, for instance, I think WildAid has been there for many years. I personally have been working on the projects that I've been involved in since I joined WildAid in 2019. So we definitely have that long-term commitment to make them successful. But at the same time, our end goal would be for them to stand on their own.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. And I just want to say, for some of the later questions, you may have already addressed some aspects of them, so just feel free to add whatever additional thoughts you have. If you get a
Sure.
question, you've answered a good bit before already. Okay. So another question that came in, doing enforcement in international waters is always a challenge since countries may have competing interests. Does WildAid get involved in enforcement for these places?
So WildAid's specific focus is generally on near coastal. However, I work for other entities as well, and it can be complex. However, that's why we try to engage regional approaches to enforcement. So, for instance, right now we're involved in the CMAR project, which is a kind of a corridor that's been set aside for shark and ray primarily protection, but it involves Colombia, Ecuador, Costa Rica, Panama. So we do work on regional cooperation, but I agree with you. Those areas beyond national jurisdiction are extremely complex to try and conduct enforcement operations in. But we have done that, and we are in close contact with many of the international partners like NOAA or Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, who routinely conduct these operations, and we support those as well.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And this was a related question, so if there's anything to add, do you intend to work in the future high seas marine protected areas under the BBNJ treaty? Yes, how?
Yeah, so again, that regional cooperation piece is really important for countries that have bordering, jurisdictions to those international waters. However, WildAid's focus again is on those near coastal. But however, there are colleagues and that I think the most important thing to understand is that fish don't know where that boundary are. So by default, we're going to be working in those spaces.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Okay. Another comment, great presentation. Do you also support the budget estimation for a full monitoring, control, and survey plan for a full EEZ? If so, what is the range estimates? And then they said 1, 2, 5 or more million US dollars a year, maybe?
Yeah, so that's a great piece of the puzzle. And yes, we do support that financial or that budgeting process. And that's why when we work with building that plan, we look at what's available and look at those priority areas. But, sky's the limit. We've been involved in implementing, control centers in, say, Galapagos, Panama, Costa Rica, Palau. So these things can become quite expensive, and that's just the monitoring aspect. If you now look at the response aspect, it can run into the many millions of dollars in preparing, different vessels and different enforcement needs in terms of staffing. So, for instance, Galapagos, one of the patrol boats that WildAid helped to procure is just a small 38 footer that dramatically increased their patrol capability. But just that 38 footer alone was close to $1 million. And that's just for the equipment. That doesn't include staffing, ongoing maintenance costs. So yeah, it's just really we help prepare those estimates, but we also try to be realistic with what budgets a country has available. But the budget is a major part of our assessment and our planning process.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Um, I guess a related question that was actually sent to me prior to the presentation is, do you have any examples of developing countries succeeding in using technology for effective enforcement?
Well, I think Galapagos is one example that we can point to that is very well equipped to monitor their particular area using satellite feeds. So they have another service that we didn't talk about because it's a commercial service. It's CLS. It's basically the French space agency, but they're able to monitor all vessel traffic, and it's part of their regulatory package, monitor all vessel traffic within the Galapagos National Park through both AIS, VMS, and real-time feeds. So that's one example of where technology has really made a difference in helping them to understand activity levels and also monitor, fishing activity within their jurisdiction. So it's fairly sophisticated when we look at these types of systems throughout the world, and other countries are kind of following along with that. There's a very sophisticated center in Myanmar that was developed. However, they maybe didn't come online to the extent that Galapagos did. But those are some examples of where the technology has really made a difference.
Great. Thank you, Bob. And on that topic of specifics, what is the average rate of detecting illegal fishing vessels relative to the frequency of surveillance activities in a given location?
Yeah, that's a a great question, and probably someone's PhD on that if you could figure that out. So obviously, we're not detecting all illegal activity. You can make some rough assumptions or what we would definitely call a threat analysis. And there's several folks out there that are doing that type of work, but it really depends on the jurisdiction, the complexion of the fleet. So for instance, detection capability of the artisanal fleet would be quite low in terms of technological detections via AIS, VMS, or even radar in some cases where smaller vessels would not be able to be detected. But I think that's really depends on case by case for different sites. And it's a very complex kind of problem to try and solve your detection rate versus your, say, compliance rate.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Let's see. Question, can the open ocean robotics technology, or are there other technologies available, determine the speed of vessels? In particular, is related to monitoring speed of vessels not carrying AIS.
Yeah, so I mean, a radar system or a vessel that's capable of deploying a radar system, like Open Ocean Robotics, their power requirements for radar are quite high. So there are other autonomous platforms that can carry a radar, but a radar is a very simple tool to determine a vessel's speed independent of AIS. So most modern radars today calculate that and track that automatically. So either a ground-based station or a vessel-based radar would be available to determine vessel speed and course, and that feed, that information could be remotely downloaded. So that's one easy way to determine a vessel's speed and direction, course, and speed independent of AIS.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Okay, a question follow-up to a previous one. Given the differences with detection rate you mentioned, are you able to generalize whether violators are often smaller artisanal vessels or commercial larger scale vessels?
Yeah, again, that totally depends on what area we're looking at. So, if it's a small coastal MPA, there may be more incursions by artisanal vessels. If it's the edge of your EEZ, then you would expect more violations to occur from larger industrial or semi-industrial. So it's really dependent on, the environment. And what we see is when we go into an area, that's exactly the type of assessment or threat analysis that we would do on a particular jurisdiction.
Thank you, Bob. And just as a warning, I do not think we're going to run out of questions. All right, let's see. Another one, what ways do you increase overall community buy-in? Specifically, do you emphasize hiring local people to be the on-site enforcement lead? Does WildAid's matrix include community requests for better, more enforcement of protected areas?
Yeah, 100%. And we didn't have time to go through the entire matrix that we utilize, but education and outreach is a major component of what we do. So in many areas, one of the reasons we try to partner with local NGOs is exactly for that local intelligence or local context that is vitally important for the marine protected area. So education and outreach and the types of methods that are being employed in the area to engage the community, whether that's for information about the rules and regulations or directly for enforcement, are vitally important. And that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time assessing and making sure that is included in our plan.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Okay. And another sort of switching gears, what elements of a strong legal finish does WildAid provide to partners? Can you speak about the partnerships involved and the importance of sensitization with judges and prosecutors?
Yeah, another great. So again, we look at gaps in that prosecutorial chain, right? So are the officers producing good reports? Is the regulatory language adequate for the types of violations that the management plan is seeking to address? And then finally, educating prosecutors and magistrates or judges in the process. In many jurisdictions, this is a challenge. And so we've developed trainings and modeling on other jurisdictions that we've done to offer training to both prosecutors and magistrates, including tabletop exercises, scenarios, to try and work through that entire enforcement process from the time the violation is detected, from the time it's filed with whatever entity, court or jurisdiction. And we work through not only the criminal process, but we look at other avenues for sanction, right? So we may look at, do they have an administrative process? Is there a way to either revoke or suspend fishing privileges through an administrative process? Is there a civil litigation process where the burden of proof is a little bit lower than criminal prosecution? And then finally, criminal prosecution, are the regulations adequate, and are the prosecutors and judges sufficiently aware of and familiar with the regulatory scheme to be able to prosecute criminally? So we absolutely look at that. It's a very, very important component of what we do as well.
Right. Thank you, Bob. Um, let's see. Back to tech, back to sort of Global Fishing Watch. Does Global Fishing Watch provide data worldwide? I'm in a remote area in Mozambique working in non-protected seas close to a national protected area.
Yeah, 100%. So they're anywhere that they get a signal, a satellite-based signal from AIS or VMS, they will make that data available. And if you go to their website, I believe you can just take a quick peek at all the areas. But I know for a fact off Mozambique, there is data available, and you would be able to see that along with Skylight. Skylight will also show you data surrounding Mozambique. So both services will show you data. But again, a lot of the vessels may not be utilizing AIS or VMS. So in that case, there may be limited satellite passes that would provide optical imagery or veers or night lights, lights at night. Some of the satellites capture that. So there may be limited satellite passes over some of the remote areas, but there will be some data for almost everywhere on the planet.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Um, let's see, another one. Let's see. Has the USV been tested, used in specific processes and MPAs yet?
Yeah, so we tested by USV. I'm assuming you mean the Open Ocean Robotics
Yeah,
platform.
yes,
Yeah, we
yes.
did use it in the Bahamas, and so we used it to down near Ragged Island in the Bahamas, a very remote location, and the unit performed very well in remote operations. However, the vessel detection range, which is one of the things we're working on, was somewhat limited, right? So the effective detection range on the USV probably didn't match the mission that we had for it. So in determining, the technology's usefulness in a particular mission, we have to look at a variety of factors. And in that particular case, we're asking it to look in a very large piece of water. And so we didn't quite have the results we needed for a vessel detection. So we're kind of trying things to open up that aperture to make its effective detection range a little bit bigger for some of those open ocean missions. However, in a smaller MPA, I think we uh, would find better results. But this is part of that ongoing process of evaluating various technologies. So one of the things we did learn from that operation in the Bahamas was the vessel's ability to operate autonomously for an extended period of time, which is really useful for us.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Okay, another question. What technological solutions exist for MCS involving wooden artisanal canoes operating within an MPA with a geofence?
Yeah, so again, that's a really complex uh, problem, right? So we have vessels that don't have a good radar signature that are very hard to detect optically. So one of the things that, we look at in those situations is human intel, right? So maybe it's not a technological solution, but it might be someone out there with a pair of binoculars as the best solution for that particular marine protected area. However, there are other types of low cost solutions that might work as well. So, putting in a camera, again, power requirements, some of the environments we work in are rather harsh. So, a camera that may not last very long, it may rust. And these are real world problems that we encounter. So, one of the things that would mitigate, say, detection of those vessels would be a mandate, a regulatory mandate to install a small radar reflector on the vessel and utilize that radar, a shore-based radar. Again, maintenance issues, harsh environment, power issues. So in some cases, technology may not be the best solution. And again, we rely on, officers out there with a good set of binoculars to try and determine vessel activity in some of these smaller MPAs that only have artisanal fleets.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bob. Okay, let's see. IUU fishing is often focused on the illegal component only. Do you also offer services related to improving reporting and regulation of fisheries?
Yeah, another great question. That unreported category is a huge problem. And so we focus not only on understanding what the vessel, what the fleet is doing, what the fishing activity is within the MPA, but also making sure that a country has an adequate way to determine landings, right? Because that's another piece of the enforcement puzzle is we often think about, oh, we're just checking boats on the water. But dockside compliance, dockside inspections, understanding what vessels are landing, and those are very, very important components to a complete enforcement and management system. So helping folks determine, the best way to catalog landings, do dockside inspections, have a adequate way to understand what fish is hitting the beach in your country is very important. So we look at those solutions and as well. And we've also helped, sometimes it's a partner, sometimes it's WildAid to assist in that regard as well, making sure that vessels have a way to understand their landings and document those landings adequately.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Let's see. Is monitoring the impact of increased enforcement on marine biodiversity also incorporated into enforcement plans, or is that done through other partnerships?
So again, one of the things, enforcement is one component of the management plan. And so the biological monitoring for the effectiveness of your efforts, whether that's management or enforcement, is something that we normally don't do because there's a lot of people that have set up a really robust monitoring plan. Our hope is that the enforcement component contributes to that enhancement of obviously, more fish inside the marine protected area. But at the end of the day, that's more part of the overall management plan. And so a lot of our enforcement officers' duties involve additional monitoring, but I think it's part of, again, the overall management plan, and we are trying to specifically address the enforcement component of that plan.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bob. Let's see. I'll combine two questions. Aside from fishing, are there technologies for monitoring or enforcement of things like vessel discharge or speed? And someone also asked specifically about sewage discharge. Oh, are you using technology to prevent sewage pollution from yachts and popular MPAs? It's a real problem in some countries, especially for coral reefs.
Yeah, I think again, part of our process, we don't actively use technology for that, but it's part of our inspection process. So just like a normal inspection, if we're training the rangers, for instance, if there are vessels anchored in your MPA, the rangers should be inspecting those. Part of the enforcement package is to ensure that that mooring is legal, right, for not only discharge, but in many areas there's a problem with anchoring on a coral reef. So this is a very big problem in Hawaii. It's a big problem in other areas. So the rangers should be monitoring for adequate permitting, adequate anchoring, making sure that discharge is not, if it's not allowed in that particular area, that the vessels, are sufficiently insulated from doing that. All the valves are turned off. All of these things that would do a particular or that the rangers would have as their authority during an inspection. We're not using technology for that, but certainly, the ranger should be inspecting for that. And going back to the original question, are we just looking at fishing? No, the rangers are, in most cases, and when I use rangers, game wardens, whatever, they are looking at the complete enforcement package. Fisheries is their, or conservation is their primary, focus, but oftentimes we'll see vessels being inspected for safety, for other components that are involved in on the water enforcement. So what we're training is the rangers to look for all these things. And in many jurisdictions, that ancillary duty would also involve things like human trafficking, drug smuggling, weapon smuggling, all the things that general law enforcement undertakes. The fisheries officers would also be trained or at least educated on signs and symptoms of those things as well.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Bob. That's a great response. Okay. You highlighted the importance of enforcement data collection, and you were instrumental in launching data collection platforms in California, namely eFINS. What has made eFINS successful? Are there other platforms you recommend? Thanks for your great work, Bob.
That sounds like someone who knows me. All right, that's great. Well, yeah, eFINS was a great success, and I think part of the success of eFINS was its really kind of its implementation across a couple of different agencies. So agencies are now better able to share data and also critical data that's that we want to look at right away, right? So for instance, a lot of records management systems collect a variety of data inputs. Some of it's useful, some of it isn't, right? So eFINS was tailored specifically for what we look at on a fisheries boarding. So when I do an inspection on a vessel, and it turned out to be a really great platform for summarizing that data and sharing that data with our enforcement partners. And, it really was helpful in that regard. So I think that's the same sort of thing that we're building into some of the data collection modules for the partners that I mentioned during my presentation. So Earth Ranger and Smart have data collection modules, and we're trying to kind of make that tailored for a fisheries inspection, an at-sea boarding, or a dockside inspection to make those pieces of information, accessible and the right things that we want to collect. In addition to that, what we try to do is make that data collection mirror a typical inspection. And what I mean by that is, for instance, when we get on a boat, when I board a boat at sea, one of the first people I talk to, or one of the first people I should talk to, is maybe the captain or the master of that vessel. So my first data collection input might be that captain's name and his information. And so making sure that as I work through my inspection, that data is collected in the same way, reinforces the sequence of my inspection and helps me remember what data I need to collect. And so all those things kind of go into a nice package that helps the officer be more efficient and more effective on the water.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bob. Um, Someone asked, can we mobilize WildAid in our MPA?
Reach out, send us an email, and we can start the process of scoping on whether or not WildAid can help with any or all of your needs.
Great. Let's see. Another question, how do you ensure that the management continues effectively once your team is no longer present for technological support or if funding is no longer available for high-tech solutions?
Right, that a challenge in every MPA. For instance, a lot of folks we have this exact issue on Cocos Island, small island off Costa Rica, where the radar was effective, but it was broken. So, this is a major expense, a major technological expense. And so we're always looking to try and help with that self-sustaining funding, that long-term funding. So there's a lot of different ways to approach that. Unfortunately, that's a challenge across all of our jurisdictions to maintain that sufficient long-term funding. So we work with, maybe legislation to develop a line item budget within a particular government jurisdiction to make sure that there's at least a sustainable long-term funding. We've worked with other models, endowments to try and establish, a long-term funding source. But at the end of the day, this is a challenge that is faced just not in small jurisdictions, but everywhere around the world. I mean, in California, which you would think would be insulated from those funding challenges. We're not. I mean, we've gone through cycles of times when we can buy equipment, when we can hire people, and when we're furloughing people and cutting salaries. So it's a constant challenge. We try to work with creative solutions like perhaps ad valorem taxing, again, endowments, developing line item dedicated funding, user fees, to just develop some sort of baseline sustainable funding for many of the projects we work on.
Okay, thank you, Bob. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. There were
Okay.
a couple drone questions. One was, are you using aerial drones with radar? Another one, do you have any examples of small scale MPAs being monitored by fixed wing waterproof drones?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I've worked on several drone projects, not just for WildAid, but others. And we found that in some cases they're very useful. In other cases, they're a bit challenging. So one, the cost effectiveness. A lot of the fixed wing, long range aerial surveillance drones are quite expensive, quite complex to work, and so they're just not quite ready for some of these smaller countries to adopt in terms of implementing. So I think one of the things that we've looked at is maybe a service that can come in and utilize the drone with their technical expertise, so the countries are not purchasing the drones outright, but purchasing the service. Even in those cases, we found it's challenging to collect the types of data we need for enforcement. Not saying they're useless in terms of other, monitoring and other types of data collection, but for enforcement purposes, we found some of the data collection very challenging. What we found that works are just some off-the-shelf solutions for smaller drones that can give kind of a quick snapshot of what a smaller MPA might look like ahead of, say, patrol activity. So, for instance, flying a smaller drone over an area before you go down into it to ensure a quick surveillance or a quick snapshot before you go in for surveillance. Also, vessel drones, vessel-based drone, can extend sometimes the range of your visual surveillance techniques. But we're finding it quite challenging to have a drone that supplies more information than just someone with a pair of binoculars in many cases. I'm not saying it hasn't worked, but in many cases, there's a cheaper and more effective alternative than some of the larger, more expensive drones. We continue to test the technology. Many of my, law enforcement and many conservation law enforcement agencies are finding them effective at some, doing some things, but we're still finding them to be challenging for a lot of what we do. And also, there's legislation that prevents the introduction of that information into a court case in many jurisdictions. So we're finding a lot of legal challenges, and we're also finding some just operational challenges with some of the larger units. But again, smaller off-the-shelf units have proven successful in helping us get a quick heads up on many of the things that we do.
You're a hero. Thank you. Thank you so much for staying on and answering all these questions. For those of you who asked questions we weren't able to get to, I will be providing all the questions that were asked to Bob and the team from others from the team at WildAid. And you could also send emails to the marine@wildaid.org email. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to everything, but Bob, thank you so much for this fantastic presentation and responses to these questions. It was so incredibly informative and helpful, and you can see comments to that effect in the chat. We so appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for hosting this. And yeah, just send the questions our way and we'll do our best to answer. And hopefully, for those of you out there, hopefully we can collaborate in the future. And I look forward to, doing this work and helping out. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you again, Bob. And thank you to everyone who attended and participated. We so appreciate you being here and we appreciate all your work for the oceans. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.